I was sitting by the window that morning, holding my cup of coffee the same way I have for the past 20 years, both hands wrapped around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my old fingers. Outside, the maple tree had started to turn, its leaves the color of rust and gold. Autumn has always been my favorite season, the time when everything slows down, softens, and reminds you that change can be beautiful, even when it hurts. But that morning, I didn't know just how much change was about to crashing through my quiet little world. I heard my son's voice before I saw him. He was in the living room, talking on the phone. Too loud, too casual, the way people speak when they think no one's listening. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but at my age, when your hearing starts to fade, you tend to notice the few things you can hear. And what I heard froze me right there in my chair. Yeah, man, we'll just dump the kids on her for a few weeks. She won't say no. That one sentence sliced through me sharper than any knife ever could. Dump the kids on her. Like I was a storage box. Like my home wasn't the same space that once raised him, fed him, sheltered him through heartbreaks and fevers. Like I was just convenient. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. I sat there, listening to my own son, the boy I carried for 9 long months, the one who used to draw me pictures of rockets and write, "I love you, Mommy," with crooked letters. Talk about me like I was a burden waiting to be used. And in that single moment, I knew this Christmas would not go the way he planned. Before I go on, let me say something to you, dear listener. If you've ever had to smile through the sting of disrespect, if you've ever swallowed your pain just to keep the peace in your family, then this story might sound a little too familiar. So please stay with me till the end. And while you're here, do me a favor. Tap the like button if you believe love should never be taken for granted, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, back to that morning. After I heard those words, I quietly set my coffee cup down. My hands were trembling just a little, but not from anger, not yet. It was disbelief first. That quiet, hollow kind of disbelief that sits behind your ribs and makes you wonder if you're overreacting. I told myself maybe I'd misheard him. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But when I peeked into the living room, I saw the truth written all over his face. He was pacing, phone in hand, talking to his wife, Claire, and laughing. Laughing! "She'll be happy," he said. "You know how she is. She'll bake cookies and tell stories. The kids love her. It'll give us a break. We need one." And then, as if I wasn't even in the same house, he added, "She doesn't have much going on anyway." That last part hit me right in the heart. Because, in a way, he was right. My life had grown quiet over the years. My husband, Robert, passed away 8 Christmases ago. The house we built together felt far too big without him, and sometimes the silence could stretch for days. I had friends, sure, But at this age, everyone's fighting their own aches, their own memories. So, maybe to my son, I was just the lonely old woman waiting for something to do. But still, dump the kids? No, that wasn't love. That wasn't family. That was entitlement dressed up as convenience. For the rest of that day, I pretended everything was fine. I smiled, cooked dinner, even helped him fix a drawer he'd been meaning to replace. But inside, I was boiling. Not out of hate, God, no. Out of heartbreak. Because when the people you love stop seeing your worth, that's a kind of death they don't even notice. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it hummed through the hours. I thought about my grandkids, sweet little angels, all 9 of them. I loved each one more than words could ever say. The idea of spending Christmas with them should have made me happy, but now it just felt tainted. Because I knew the truth. I wasn't being included out of love. I was being used. So, I decided something right then and there. If they were going to dump the kids on her, then they'd better be ready for the surprise of their lives. The next morning, I called Claire. I kept my voice steady, kind, the way I always spoke to her. She sounded cheerful, probably because she thought I didn't know. We chatted about the usual, school plays, holiday shopping, how busy everything was. And then she said it. "Mom, we were actually wondering, would it be all right if the kids stayed with you for a few weeks over Christmas? Just until things settle down here. You know how hectic work gets." I took a deep breath and said, "Of course, sweetheart, I'd love to." But what I didn't tell her, what I didn't tell either of them, was that I was planning something they would never forget. You see, people think old age makes you weak. But the truth is, it gives you clarity. You stop wasting time on pettiness, but you also stop tolerating disrespect. That Christmas, I wasn't just going to bake cookies and tell bedtime stories. I was going to remind my family who I really was. The weeks passed quickly. The house came alive again. Twinkling lights, pine candles, the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven. And then the car pulled into the driveway. Out came 9 little faces full of excitement and noise. I hugged every single one of them, my heart swelling with the kind of love only a grandmother knows. But when my son came up the porch with that easy grin, something inside me hardened. He kissed my cheek, said, "Thanks again, Mom. You're the best." And I smiled back and said, "Oh, don't worry, darling. I know exactly what I'm doing." He didn't catch the edge in my voice. He just waved, got back in the car, and drove away, completely unaware that this time it wouldn't be me doing the giving. It would be him learning the lesson. That night, as the children settled in, I pulled out an old photo album. Pictures from when their father was their age. Muddy shoes, gap-toothed smiles, birthday cakes covered in too many candles. The kids laughed, asked questions, wanted stories. And I gave them stories, not fairy tales, but real ones. Stories about kindness, responsibility, respect, about how love isn't measured by convenience, but by effort. They listened, eyes wide, and something inside me softened again, because maybe it wasn't their fault. Maybe it was the world that had made their parents forget. But I was going to change that, one story at a time. Still, part of me wondered, when my son came back, would he even notice the change in me? Would he realize what he'd done? Or would he just keep thinking of me as the easy option, the backup plan? I didn't have the answer then, but I was about to find out in a way none of us expected. Because that Christmas didn't go according to anyone's plan. The first few days were pure joy, the kind only children can bring into an old house. The walls, once quiet and heavy with memory, now echoed with laughter, footsteps, and the occasional argument over who got the last cookie. I'd forgotten how alive a home could feel when filled with voices. It almost made me forget why they were there in the first place. Almost. Every evening, after I tucked them into bed, I'd sit by the fireplace and stare at the dancing flames. The light would flicker over the framed photographs on the mantel. Robert in his uniform, my son as a boy holding his first fishing rod, the three of us smiling in a world that felt a lifetime away. Sometimes I'd whisper to my late husband, "You'd know what to do, wouldn't you, Robert? You'd teach him respect without raising your voice." But Robert wasn't here anymore. It was just me. And I was going to teach that lesson in my own quiet way. The second week rolled around, and my son hadn't called once. Not to check on the kids, not to ask how I was doing. Claire texted a few times. Short, polite messages with emojis that felt like bandages over something broken. I could tell they were busy, but it was more than that. They'd detached. They'd relieved themselves of responsibility, and the silence between us proved it. So, one night, while the kids slept upstairs, I opened my old desk drawer. Inside were the worn pages of letters Robert and I had exchanged during his years in the service. I hadn't read them in decades, but I needed his voice, needed the reminder of a time when family meant sacrifice, not convenience. One line in his handwriting caught my eye. "Love isn't about ease, Ruth. It's about showing up when it's hardest to." And that's when my plan became clear. I decided to stop being available, to stop making it easy. I wouldn't answer their calls right away. I wouldn't send them updates. I'd let them feel the distance, the weight of not knowing. Maybe then they'd realize how much I carried for them without ever asking for anything in return. Days turned into weeks. Snow fell softly outside, covering everything in a hush of white. The children grew used to my rhythm: homemade breakfasts, bedtime stories, chores after playtime. They learned to wash their own dishes, fold their clothes, and help one another. It was beautiful to watch them bloom in discipline and affection, things their parents were too hurried to teach. But something was shifting in me too. The anger that once sat like a stone in my chest began to melt into something deeper. Sadness. Because every time one of the kids said, "Grandma, can you play with us?" or "Grandma, I love you," it reminded me of how far my son had drifted. I started to wonder where I'd gone wrong. Had I loved him too much? Given too freely? Maybe by always being there, I'd made him forget my value. Then, 3 days before Christmas, the phone rang. It was Claire. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "Mom, we're thinking we might stay with friends for Christmas this year. Things are just complicated." I could hear the guilt beneath her words, and behind that guilt, fear. Not of me, but of losing control. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Of course, dear," I said softly. "You do what's best for you." When I hung up, I looked at the tree standing proudly in my living room. Every ornament told a story. Robert's favorite snowman, my son's handmade angel from 3rd grade, a star my daughter-in-law once bought from a flea market in Vermont. So many memories, all tied to love that used to mean something. I touched the angel gently, whispered, "You'll come home soon enough, my boy." On Christmas Eve, the children and I baked pies, sang carols, and stayed up late watching the snow pile high outside. It was perfect, except for one thing. They missed their parents. I could see it in the way their laughter quieted when the phone stayed silent. So, I gathered them around the fire and told them a story. It wasn't about Santa or reindeer or gifts. It was about a young mother long ago who raised a boy on her own through winters without heat and summers without air conditioning, because she believed love was worth every sacrifice. The children listened, wide-eyed. "Was that you, Grandma?" one of them asked. I smiled. "It could be, or it could be anyone who loves enough to give everything, even when no one says thank you." That night, after they fell asleep, I stepped outside. The cold air bit into my cheeks, but I stayed there, watching the snow glisten under the porch light. Somewhere out there, my son and his wife were celebrating without their children, thinking they'd gotten a break. They had no idea that the lesson had already begun. Because the next morning, Christmas morning, they'd get the call that would change everything. It wasn't from me. It was from the school principal. He'd tried to reach them first, then finally called me when no one answered. A pipe had burst at the elementary building, flooding part of the gym. The school was asking parents to volunteer for cleanup and temporary storage of materials. Since my grandkids' names were on the volunteer list, they expected one of their parents to show up. But their parents were nowhere to be found. So, I did what I've always done. I showed up. I bundled the kids in the car, drove through the icy streets, and helped lift soggy boxes, mop floors, and stack supplies. The children worked beside me without complaint. When we finished, the principal, an old friend of mine, said to me, "You're still saving everyone, Ruth." I smiled, but didn't answer, because saving them wasn't the goal anymore. Teaching them was. When we got back home that evening, my phone finally rang again. It was my son. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding tired but cheerful. "Just wanted to check if everything's okay with the kids." I could hear laughter in the background, music, glasses clinking, people talking. "They're wonderful," I replied. "We had a long day cleaning the school gym, where your name was supposed to be on the list." There was a long silence on the line. Then a weak laugh. Oh, yeah, we forgot to call about that. Sorry, Mom. Things have been crazy." Crazy. That word again. The excuse that smooths over every act of neglect. I said calmly, "Don't worry. The kids and I managed just fine. We always do." He started to say something, but I could hear someone calling his name in the background. He hesitated, then said, "We'll come by tomorrow, okay?" And I replied, "I'll be waiting." But he didn't know how I'd be waiting, because by the time he came back, I'd have something to show him, something that would make him think twice before ever saying, "Dump the kids on her," again. The next morning, the sun broke through the snow clouds, casting a golden glow over everything. The world looked peaceful, almost innocent. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for cinnamon rolls, when I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. My son's car, right on time. The kids ran to the window, squealing, "They're here! They're here!" Their excitement was pure, unfiltered, the kind that makes you both happy and heartbreakingly sad at once. I wiped my hands on a towel and took a deep breath. My plan wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about love with backbone. When the door opened, my son and Claire stepped in, carrying gift bags and that easy holiday smile people wear when they think everything is fine. The kids rushed into their arms, and for a moment I let myself feel grateful. At least they still had that bond. But as soon as the hugs ended, I noticed the restlessness in my son's eyes. He wasn't here for family. He was here to check a box. "Hey, Mom," he said, dropping a bag on the couch. "We missed you, and the kids, of course. How things been?" "Busy," I said evenly, "but good." Claire glanced around. "The house looks beautiful, Mom. You really outdid yourself." I smiled, though my heart was steady and cold beneath it. "Thank you, sweetheart. The kids helped. They've learned a lot these past few weeks. How to clean, cook, and even fix a leaky faucet." My son chuckled. "You've turned them into little soldiers, huh?" "Not soldiers," I said softly. "Just responsible people." He didn't catch the tone. He rarely did. I told them lunch would be ready soon, then invited them to sit in the living room. On the coffee table, I'd placed an old wooden box, the one Robert had given me on our 15th anniversary. Inside it were letters, photographs, and one particular note I'd chosen carefully for that day. As we sat down to eat, the atmosphere was pleasant enough. The kids chattered, Claire complimented the food, and for a while everything looked normal. But I could feel the weight of what needed to be said pressing against my chest. So, after dessert, I excused myself, brought out the box, and placed it between us. "What's this?" my son asked. "Memories. And a reminder." I opened the lid and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "This," I began, "was a letter your father wrote to you when you were 12. You probably don't remember. It was during his last deployment." I unfolded the paper gently and read aloud. "Son, if there's one thing I want you to learn from me, It's that family is never a burden. You don't measure love by convenience, but by what you're willing to do when it's inconvenient. I looked up then, straight into his eyes. They were the same blue as Robert's had been, but dimmer somehow, tired. I said, "Your father believed those words. And so did I. I just wonder if you still do." The room fell silent. Even the kids seemed to sense the tension. Claire's eyes darted nervously between us, while my son's face hardened with the discomfort of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Mom, come on! Are we really doing this now? It's Christmas." "Yes," I replied, "because Christmas is exactly when people should remember what family means." I could see the wall in his expression starting to crack. I pressed on, not with anger, but with a quiet ache that filled every word. "I heard you that day, Michael. The morning you told Claire you'd dump the kids on me. I wasn't supposed to, I know, but I did. And it broke me. Not because you asked for help. God knows I'd give you everything I have, but because of how little I meant in that sentence." His fork froze halfway to his plate. The color drained from his face. Claire covered her mouth with her hand, whispering, "Oh, Michael." I continued, "I've spent my whole life showing up for you. Every scraped knee, every broken heart, every dream you thought you couldn't reach. I was there. And all I wanted was to believe you'd grown into a man who understood what that meant." For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, with a shaky voice, he said, "Mom, I didn't mean it like that. You know how people talk. It was a stupid thing to say." Yes, it was. But sometimes stupid things reveal honest hearts. The silence stretched between us like a wound neither of us knew how to close. Then I stood, walked to the window, and gestured outside. "Do you see that swing set?" I asked. "Your father built it the year you turned 7. He worked through the night to finish it before Christmas morning. He didn't do it because it was easy. He did it because love, real love, doesn't count the cost." My son's eyes glistened then, and he lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Mom." For a moment, I wanted to rush to him, to tell him it was okay. But no, he needed to sit in it, feel the truth. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't rebuild what neglect tears down. You can start, though, right now." He nodded, wiped his eyes, and turned toward his kids. "Guys, come here." They crowded around him, little hands touching his shoulders, his arms. "Grandma's right," he told them. "I forgot what's important. And I promise, from now on, I'll never make her feel like that again." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. It wasn't victory I felt, it was relief. Maybe, just maybe, I hadn't failed after all. The rest of that day was quiet, but warm. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years, about Dad, about childhood, about how life gets so loud that we forget to listen. Claire cried too, admitting that they'd both lost sight of what family truly meant. When they finally left that night, I stood on the porch, watching the taillights disappear into the dark. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel empty. I felt seen. But the story doesn't end there. because what happened after that Christmas changed the course of all of our lives in ways none of us could have predicted. 2 months later, everything I thought had been healed was tested all over again when tragedy came knocking at their door. It was late February when the phone rang again. I remember because the snow had finally begun to melt, revealing patches of muddy grass and the first shy hints of spring. I was folding laundry when I heard the sound, the kind of ring that seems to pierce right through your bones. I picked up the phone, not knowing that on the other end of the line waited the moment that would test everything I had left in me. It was Claire. Her voice was trembling, so faint it barely sounded like her. "Mom, it's Michael." My heart stopped. "What about him?" "He's been in an accident." The words didn't register at first. They just hung there, suspended in the air, waiting for my old heart to understand them. When I finally did, my knees gave out. I clutched the edge of the counter just to stay upright. "Is he... He's alive," she rushed to say. "But it's bad, really bad." I was in the hospital within the hour. The drive felt endless. Every red light a cruel reminder that life doesn't stop even when yours does. When I reached the ICU, the sterile smell hit me first. Disinfectant, fear, and that strange metallic chill that only hospitals carry. And there he was. My son, my boy, tubes in his arms, bruises on his face, his body too still for a man who used to fill every room with noise. I stood there for a long time, not saying a word, just watching his chest rise and fall under the machines. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Just a hollow ache. The kind that only mothers know. The ache of seeing your child broken, no matter how grown they are. Claire was sitting in the corner, eyes swollen, clutching his wedding ring in her hand. "They said he fell asleep at the wheel," she whispered. "Working late again, always trying to fix everything after Christmas." It hit me then. He had been trying. He'd been coming home early to see the kids, helping around the house, calling me every Sunday. He'd been making up for lost time. And now the very exhaustion from that effort had nearly taken him from us. For 3 days, I didn't leave the hospital. I slept in the waiting room, holding his childhood blanket I'd brought from home. Yes, I still had it, faded and torn, but filled with memories. I talked to him, even when he couldn't hear me. Told him stories from when he was little, how he used to chase fireflies in the backyard, how he cried the first time he saw snow. I told him about his father, how proud Robert would have been of the man he was becoming. On the 4th night, I was sitting by his bed when I felt a hand twitch beneath mine. Then another. I looked up, and his eyes were open. Weak, blurry, but open. "Mom," he croaked, barely a whisper. I leaned closer, tears finally breaking free. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." He blinked, swallowed, and said something that broke me in half. "I thought I'd never get to tell you. I meant what I said. I'm sorry." I shook my head, pressing my lips to his forehead. No, you already told me. You showed me. You came back. That's all that matters." He tried to smile, but it was small and tired. Still, it was there. That same smile from when he was a boy who'd scraped his knee and needed comfort. He stayed in the hospital for weeks, learning to walk again, to use his left arm. Claire was there every day, and so was I. We took turns reading to him, feeding him, helping him regain his strength. In those long days of recovery, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. Gratitude. The boy I raised was still there, buried beneath years of noise and ambition. When they finally released him, spring had come in full bloom. The trees were alive again, and so was he. They moved back in with me for a while after that. Said it was easier for the kids, but I knew it was more than that. They needed family again. The real kind. The kind that doesn't measure value by convenience or favors. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a backup plan. I felt like home. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Michael recovered slowly, but every step he took was a small miracle. He'd sit with me on the porch in the evenings, both of us wrapped in blankets, watching the sunset over the yard where that old swill set still stood. One evening, he turned to me and said, "You know, Mom, when I was in that hospital bed, I thought about all the times I called you just to ask for help. And I realized I never asked how you were doing. Not once." I smiled softly. "That's what parents do, honey. We don't ask for much. We just hope one day you'll see us the way we saw you." He nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. "I do now. I promise." And he kept that promise. That next Christmas, the house was full again, but not because someone needed a favor. They came early, brought food, gifts, and laughter that didn't feel forced. I didn't have to bake everything myself. Claire and the kids insisted on helping. We cooked together, danced in the kitchen, and when it came time to sit down for dinner, Michael raised his glass and said, "To my mother, the strongest woman I know, and to never, ever taking her for granted again." Everyone cheered, and I couldn't stop the tears this time, because I realized something profound sitting at that table, surrounded by love that had finally learned to respect itself. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of being unseen. It's about teaching others how to love you, not through anger, but through grace. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window again, just like I had that morning months ago when this all began. The world outside was quiet, snow falling gently in the moonlight. I whispered to the darkness, maybe to Robert, maybe to God, maybe to every mother who's ever been taken for granted. They don't always mean to hurt us. Sometimes they just forget who taught them love in the first place. And then I smiled, because now they'd never forget again. I sipped my cocoa, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Peace had finally found its way home. I found an old voicemail once, buried under years of dust and silence. It was from my son. His voice sounded distant, rushed, and full of something I can't quite name anymore. He said, "Mom, I know you'll manage. You always do. Thanks for taking them for a few weeks." Then there was a pause, a laugh in the background, and someone, his wife I think, whispered, "Just dump the kids on her. She loves it." That message still echoes in my mind, even now. Not because of the words themselves, but because of what came after, what those words set into motion. what they cost all of us. I used to think love meant doing whatever it takes to keep your family together. That's what I believed for most of my 68 years on this earth. But now, I understand something much harder. Sometimes love means saying no, saying stop, saying, I can't do this anymore, even when your heart begs you to keep trying. If you're listening right now, take a second to think about your own family. Would you know when enough is enough? Or would you keep forgiving until there's nothing left of you to give? Let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Maybe we'll find we've lived similar lives in very different places. My name is Martha. I live in a small town outside Portland, Oregon, in a little white house with paling paint and a creaky porch swing that's been there longer than my knees have worked right. It used to be full of laughter, birthday candles, and Sunday dinners. Now it's mostly quiet. Too quiet sometimes. I had 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, and if you'd told me years ago that one of them would turn my world upside down with a single phone call, I'd have smiled politely and changed the subject. My oldest, David, was always the confident one, the planner, the one who had everything figured out, or at least that's what he wanted people to think. He and his wife Rachel lived 2 states away in California. We weren't as close as I'd have liked, but I tried to stay in touch. I'd send Christmas gifts, birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, and homemade jam every summer. I didn't expect much back, a thank you call maybe, a photo of the kids once in a while. Then that voicemail came out of nowhere. They were going on a couples retreat, he said later when I called him back, a chance to reset, reconnect, and recharge. I was happy for them, truly. Lord knows marriage can be a rocky road. But something in his tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't a request. It was a statement, a decision already made. Mom, you'll love having them. You've always said you miss them. Think of it as some quality time. 3 kids, ages 4, 7, and 9. I hesitated, but before I could even answer, Rachel got on the line. They've been looking forward to seeing you. You're the best grandma ever. It was the kind of compliment you give right before a favor you know is too big to ask. 2 days later, their SUV pulled into my driveway. The kids tumbled out, giggling, dragging backpacks and half-finished sodas. David didn't even come inside. He kissed my cheek, popped the trunk, and handed me a folder. Their schedules, food allergies, bedtime routines, the works. You'll be fine. Rachel waved from the passenger seat. We'll only be gone 2 weeks, she called out, smiling like she meant it. They drove away before I could ask a single question. At first, it wasn't so bad. The kids filled the house with noise again. Laughter, cartoons, the sound of little feet racing down the hallway. I made pancakes for breakfast and tucked them in at night. I forgot how full life felt with children around. But by the end of the first week, I started to notice things. The way my youngest granddaughter flinched when I raised my voice slightly. The dark circles under the oldest boy's eyes. The way they clung to me when I tried to drop them off at Sunday school. When I called David to ask when they'd be back, his phone went straight to voicemail. I texted, no reply. I messaged Rachel on Facebook, nothing. By day 10, I knew something was wrong. I checked the retreat website he'd mentioned. It had been shut down 6 months earlier. The number was disconnected. That's when I realized they weren't coming back. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night, the folder still in my hands. It had their insurance cards, some loose cash, and a letter I hadn't seen before. It wasn't even sealed properly. In David's handwriting, it said, "Mom, we need time. We can't handle it right now. The kids will be better off with you for a while. Please don't try to find us. We'll call when we're ready." There was no return address, no phone number, nothing. The kids were asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware. I just sat there, numb, listening to the old clock tick on the wall. I'd heard of people abandoning pets, but their children? Their own flesh and blood? I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That my grown son had decided to take a break from parenting? That he vanished without a trace? So I did what I've always done. I took care of things. I took care of them. The days blurred into weeks. I juggled doctor's appointments, school pickups, and late-night tears when they missed their parents. I told them stories about when their dad was little, how he once broke his arm climbing the fence to get a lost baseball. It made them laugh, but it also broke me inside. Bills started piling up. Groceries, clothes, school supplies. It added up fast. My pension wasn't enough to cover it all, so I started selling my old jewelry, then my late husband's tools. I told myself it was temporary, that any day now, David would call, apologize, and come home. But months passed, then a year, and one cold December morning, everything came crashing down. It was the first snow of the season. The kids were outside making snow angels when a man in a gray coat knocked on my door. A social worker. He said he was following up on a report. Someone had claimed the children were being kept without legal guardianship. I felt the blood drain from my face. He asked for documentation, custody papers, medical consent forms, anything proving I was their guardian. I had none. All I had was that crumpled letter. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat by the fireplace and stared at the flames. I hadn't cried like that in years, not even when my husband died. I'd done everything right. I'd loved them, fed them, protected them, and now I might lose them because of paperwork. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, I got a call. It was David. When I answered, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. His voice sounded older somehow, strained and hollow, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't mean for it to be this long." I didn't know whether to scream or cry. "Where are you, David? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I almost dropped the phone then. Trust him? After a year of silence? After selling my husband's tools just to keep their children fed? "David, you can't just disappear and expect me to fix everything. I'm not young anymore. My savings are gone. The social worker—" "I'll send money," he said quickly. "I promise. Just a few more weeks." And then the line went dead. For days, I waited for a deposit, a call, an email, anything. Nothing came. Weeks turned into months again, and the weight of it all started to show. I stopped sleeping well. My hands trembled when I wrote checks. The kids noticed. The youngest, Emma, started asking if Daddy was mad at me. The oldest, Ethan, stopped talking altogether for a while. Then, one afternoon, something arrived in the mail. A letter addressed to Resident. Inside was a foreclosure notice. The bank was taking the house. I had missed too many payments. That night, I sat the kids down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed their father decades ago. I told them we might have to move. I didn't tell them where. Ethan looked at me, his brown eyes wide and terrified. "But Grandma, where will Santa find us?" I smiled and told him Santa always finds good kids. Then I went into my room and sobbed until dawn. The next morning, I made a decision. If David and Rachel wouldn't come back, I would find them. I called every hospital, every friend, every number I could think of. I even drove 3 hours to a town where Rachel's cousin used to live. Nobody had seen them. It was as if they'd vanished. One day, while going through the old folder, I noticed a faded business card tucked between the pages. It was for a therapist, Rachel's therapist. I hesitated, but dialed anyway. When the woman answered, her voice was calm, professional. She said, "I can't disclose personal details after I explained who I was, but if you're worried about their well-being, you're right to be." Something about the way she said that made my skin crawl. A few weeks later, I got another knock on the door. This time, it was 2 social workers and a police officer. They had received an anonymous tip that I was harboring the children. The words stung worse than any slap. Harboring. As if I'd kidnapped my own grandchildren? They searched the house, checked the bedrooms, the fridge, the closets. The kids clung to my legs, crying. When it was over, the officer handed me a card. "You need to appear in court. Custody review hearing." That night, I felt something in me break. Not just fear or exhaustion, something deeper. The quiet realization that love had turned into a battle I might not win. The courtroom smelled of old paper and cheap coffee. The judge looked over my file with tired eyes. The social worker testified that while the children appeared cared for, their legal guardians had abandoned them without transfer of custody. The state had to intervene in the children's best interest. I tried to speak, to tell my side of the story, but my voice trembled. My lawyer, a kind man working pro bono, did his best, but the system doesn't move on sympathy. It moves on documents. Then, just as the judge was preparing to rule, the courtroom door opened. David walked in. He looked thinner than I remembered. Hollow cheeks, eyes sunken, a few days' worth of stubble. His clothes were wrinkled, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a folder. For a moment, I forgot where we were. My son, my baby boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, was standing there like a stranger who'd seen too much. The judge paused. "Mr. Walker, are you the biological father of the minors in question?" David nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm sorry I'm late." I couldn't speak. My throat felt locked shut. Every muscle in me wanted to stand, to run to him, to demand answers. But I stayed still, my fingers digging into the fabric of my skirt. The judge asked him where he'd been, why he'd left the children for nearly 2 years. The courtroom went quiet. Even the social worker leaned forward, waiting. David swallowed hard. "My wife, Rachel, she's in a treatment facility. She was diagnosed with something. Bipolar disorder. Maybe worse. It started before we left. She was getting violent, unpredictable. I didn't know what to do. We went to that retreat to figure things out, but..." His voice cracked. "She had a breakdown. I tried to get her help, but I didn't have insurance anymore. We lost the apartment. We lost everything. I thought leaving the kids with my mom, temporarily, was the safest option. He looked at me then, eyes full of guilt and something else I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. "I didn't mean to disappear, Mom," he said softly. "I was ashamed. I couldn't even take care of myself. How was I supposed to take care of them?" Tears blurred my vision. All that anger, all those nights I cursed his name, melted into something else. Grief, confusion, relief, maybe even pity. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't. He was broken too. The judge leaned back, sighing heavily. "Mr. Walker, this situation could have been avoided had you maintained communication. The court will need to verify your claims and ensure the children's welfare. Until then, temporary guardianship remains with your mother." I didn't even realize what he said at first. Temporary guardianship remains with your mother. It felt like the first breath of air after drowning. After the hearing, David approached me in the hallway. The kids were waiting outside with a volunteer, holding paper cups of water and coloring sheets they didn't really touch. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I don't deserve it, but thank you." I looked at him for a long time. "They missed you," I said finally. "Every day." He nodded, eyes wet. "I miss them too. I just didn't know how to come back." There was so much I wanted to say. How I'd sold everything, how I'd prayed for him, how his children clung to me at night, whispering his name. But instead, I'd just said, "Then start by showing up tomorrow. Be here. Be their dad again."